Nano Machine. Bai, Ang Hong Guolya. Chapter 364. Be the Flame, Huang. Part 1. Bloodmaster had been killed by the air sword, dying miserably before falling into the pond which had water bubbling due to the heat. Bubble. Bubble. This is unusual. Why isn't it bubbling now? Thanks to her, Chun Yuan got to take a better look at the pond. It was strange enough that a flame was burning in the center of the pond. The water just boiled and the pond didn't dry out. Chun Yuan wasn't affected by the heat thanks to the techniques he was using, but he still felt the temperature, so he decided to take a couple steps back. The user has 38% of energy remaining. Nano's voice reminded him of his energy usage. It wasn't like he had been attacking for a long time, but even after reaching the perfect Supreme Master level, such strong attacks were still burdensome. What is left now is to take down that woman whose body is on fire. Wing. In the past he had met a woman whose body was deadly cold, but meeting someone with fire on their body was a first for Chun Yuan. The guardian, Ranong, was struggling to deal with the air swords which were being controlled by Nano. However, she was doing a lot better at defending herself than Bloodmaster had. Clang! 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 The sword chi from the air sword permeated the hall. With every passing second, defending herself became more and more difficult. It was a natural outcome. She was dealing with the 24 demon swords and sword force of Heavenly Demon, which were exerting tremendous energy. Puck. Ugh. The trajectory of the swords which were leaving behind a blue hue, cut through Ranong's ribs. As a result, she ended up staggering for a moment, which made another sword cut the side of her left thigh. However, she didn't feel any pain. Ignoring her injuries, she raised her hands to prevent more swords from reaching her. The wounds? Upon looking closely, Chun Yuan found that her wounds were healing. It looked very much like regeneration. It wasn't as fast as the freshener regeneration that Nano provided him, but the speed was commendable. The flame around her body didn't seem to interfere or halt the process of regeneration. Is that why she's been able to remain standing until now? The rapid regeneration and not being able to feel pain were the only driving force which kept her on her feet. Of course, it wasn't just that. It would be no exaggeration to say that Ranong could be considered as a top-ranked martial artist in Wulin. But this needs to end. There was no more reason for Chun Yuan to stand still, especially after killing Bloodmaster. Wung. Blue light began to condense around the air, and 6 sword chi air swords generated again. Even the 5 great masters of Wulin would struggle against 12 swords and declare surrender. Would this woman be able to withstand it? Swoosh. Just when Chun Yuan had raised his hand to bring an end to the battle. Quack. A familiar voice groaned. The sound came from the opposite end of the entrance. Huang. When he looked over, he saw that Huang had been caught by someone, a man who seemed to be in terrible condition. Seeing the blood on the man, Chun Yuan felt that it was a miracle that he could still stand. The man, whose arm seemed to have been crushed to a pulp, had his dagger at Huang's neck with a threatening look in his eyes. Damn it. Damn it. What kind of situation is this? Having gotten himself caught, Huang couldn't hide how embarrassed he was. He was the one who did run down right away after hearing explosions coming from the lowest level. Well, the sound had actually been caused by Chun Yuan overbearingly making a hole through the ceiling. However, just as he jumped in to help Chun Yuan, he ended up getting ambushed by a man who'd jumped out from the piles of stones, the aide of Bloodmaster, who'd been assumed dead. Ugh, you. Shut up. If you don't want to die, don't act up. Huang slowly began to gather energy to escape from the man's grasp, but it was useless. Huang had reached the Super Master level warrior, but his opponent seemed to be skilled. Before he could even act, he got stabbed in his right shoulder and another warning was given. Puck. Quack. Didn't I tell you not to act up? If you move once more, I'll cut your throat. The cold dagger pressed dangerously against his skin. Eventually, Huang decided to not rebel. Who is that guy? Asked the man with labored breaths, due to his injuries and crushed arm. They'd assumed he'd died, however, he just barely managed to survive the falling rocks and escape with his life. He had injuries all over his body, but was shocked at the amount of luck he had on his side. He was injured, but had also been able to subdue Huang, who was of a higher level than him. Bloodmaster is dead. His grasp around Huang tightened as he wondered what had to be done. He'd thought of escaping after the treasure got taken by Bloodmaster, but then he'd witnessed her arms being cut off. It makes no sense. He killed that monstrous woman so easily? A monster suppressed another monster. In a short moment, he had numerous things to worry about. Should he keep hiding behind the stones and pretend to be dead, and wait for them all to disappear? There is no way that monster wouldn't notice my presence. Seeing how he dealt with the two women, it was obvious that that monster would detect him. That was when, from the piles of stone, someone called Lord, whilst trying to enter. That was when he decided to take this opportunity. Huh? What is your relationship with him? You just told me to shut up a moment ago. Don't play with me, I'm not in the mood. Sure. Even before he could warn Bong, Chen Yuan, who was on the other side of the hall, appeared in front of them. He was so fast that the man didn't even notice. This man is a real monster. If Bloodmaster couldn't do anything, then what could a simple aide do? Lolord. Bong, who'd been caught by an enemy out of nowhere, cried out with a sad expression. He knew that he had unintentionally turned into a burden. Gah. The mood in the hall didn't seem good. Although there was distance between the aide and Chen Yuan, it felt like swords were ready to kill him at any moment. And his anxiety couldn't help but make him nervous without realizing. The man, who was trying to be calm, gulped without his knowledge. Calm down. This man has to be a member of that monsters group. He was afraid, but he could think of a couple things. The captured man had called the monster of a man Lord, which meant that he had to be related to him. With stone-cold eyes, staring at him, Chen Yuan spoke. Let him go. Ah, Lord. Bong's lips trembled at the angry look on Yuan's face. He had been serving Yuan for 5 years now. For Yuan to show such a face, meant that he was a cherished subordinate. Bullshit. Don't come closer. If you move a step further, I will kill this man. The man said with a tense expression. It was obvious what would happen if he released Bong. Gah. Quack. I told him not to move. The energy Chen Yuan was releasing only grew stronger, which only instilled more fear. He decided to act, which meant that there was no chance for retreat. I'm warning you. If you want to save your subordinate, get the blood of Qilin to me. And if you pledge to release me, I will let this man go. He raised his head and pointed to the burning flames on the rock in the middle of the pound. He wasn't sure if the threat would work or not, but it was the only option he had. If he cares for this person, he will do it. Seeing how angry the monster before him was, it was clear that he must cherish his subordinate. No matter how angry he looked, if he thought rationally, he would have no choice but to accept those terms. But there was one thing he didn't know. Ordinary people may make sacrifices to protect people or things precious to them. However, Chen Yuan was a person of the demonic cult to the core. How about I suggest one thing? Shushukhist. If you let Bong go now, I'll kill you as painlessly as possible. But if you don't, I will kill you so painfully that you'll regret being born into this world. The words from Yuan made the man go silent. He thought that Yuan would come up with another peace suggestion, not threaten his life. Moreover, he had decided to kill him in both options. What the hell is with him? If this was how the man before him operated, then threatening him would be of no use. The opponent is stronger, and his suggestions only end with death. However, something unexpected happened. Only 15% of energy remains. I can no longer maintain air sword's trajectory. Swoosh. Along with the voice of Nano, the air swords, which were being operated by the remote system, halted. It was all because of the time which got wasted due to the worthless threats of the man. Shit. Chen Yuan's eyes trembled for a moment. The energy that was consumed in order to maintain the air sword was beyond one's imagination. If Nano consumed any more energy to maintain the air swords, Chen Yuan knew that it would cause a heavy setback for him when dealing with the remaining enemies, and so the air sword's remote control was stopped. Wing. As a result, Ranong, who was dealing with 6 air swords, got some space to breathe. Ranong, who'd been freed, began approaching Chen Yuan without hesitation. She seemed visibly angry as she ran with flames all over her body. It is dangerous. Bong, who was the first to look at her movements, instinctively judged that it would be dangerous to get in contact with her. In a short moment, Bong bit his lip. Deciding that he shouldn't be a burden, he tried to attack his captor. Raising the energy in his hand, he decided to throw away his life to save his lord. Huang. Why you? There was no way that his captor wouldn't notice this. When the chi began to rise from Bong, he instantly felt threatened, making him subconsciously act and ended up cutting Bong's neck with the dagger. Slash. Quack. Bong, whose neck had been slashed, fell forward. Drops of blood scattered around as he fell. Lord, behind you. Falling face down, Bong pointed his finger somewhere. He was dying, yet he desperately tried to inform his lord of something. Buning. Thud. Yoan, who couldn't hold in his anger anymore, dashed forward, instantly covering 10 steps. Fufust. The eyes of the captor trembled. He'd ended up acting without thought, so he had to defend himself. Chuck. Quack. A black sword in the air moved with the speed of lightning, and the arm which was holding the dagger got cut off. Before the severed arm even fell to the ground, Chen Yuan made the black sword fall to the ground. Quack. Whack. The energy his hands were releasing was overpowering. The energy was so strong that anyone in the way would be cut down. Quack. What are you doing? I told you that you'd regret it. PL, please just kill me. Thud. Quack. Chen Yuan's finger broke through the man's skull. It was a lot more painful than his arm being cut off. It was indescribably painful. The kind of pain no one would wish on anyone. Damn it. He wanted to inflict more pain, but Yuan immediately sensed something fast approaching from behind. With his finger pushed into the man's skull, Chen Yuan held him by his shoulder. Duck. And no way. Blood was oozing out from the skull, and his eyes were wet with the tears he cried. The man realized what Chen Yuan was planning to do. No. Crack. Swoosh. Quack. The scream didn't end. Chen Yuan held onto the captor's shoulders, flexed his muscles and tore the head away from the body. Along with the head, the spine was also gruesomely torn from the body. The man felt no pain, but as he'd been warned, it was the most painful and cruel death. Fack. Chen Yuan threw the head onto the floor and immediately reached towards the ground. Swoosh. Chuck. The black sword which had fallen to the floor, whizzed back into his hands. Chen Yuan, who'd retrieved his sword, spun around, and threw it at Ranong, who was coming for him. But then, thud. Ranong, who surely looked like she wanted to attack him, suddenly fell to her knees. Chen Yuan wondered what she was up to, but she still kept her head down and shouted so loud that the hall echoed with every word from her. Ah! Have you finally come looking for me? The lord of the demonic cult, he who is the heavenly father of the great demonic cult. Chapter 365. Be the Flame, Bong. Part 2. Wing. Ranong was still engulfed in flames as she bowed her head. Chen Yuan couldn't understand the reason behind her sudden change in behavior. A person considered to be the hidden power of the imperial palace and the guardian of the treasure in the royal shrine, had suddenly revealed herself to be a member of the demonic cult. What the hell is this? At Chen Yuan's words, she lifted her head and said, Before that, aren't there more urgent matters at hand? Her eyes, which were burning in flames, looked over at Bong, who was lying motionlessly on the floor. Yuan sensed no hostility from her, but he couldn't guess what she was planning. What do I do? The right move would be to defeat her. However, checking on Bong's condition came before that. Do a good job to get accepted. Please put your doubts aside. As she felt the doubt in his words, she gathered the flames on her body. As the flames left her body, her naked body, covered in red scales, was revealed. With no clothes covering her body, the only thing visible were the red scales that covered her body. Fat. She slowly gathered the alien energy emanating from her body, whilst Chen Yuan quickly moved to Bong's side. Bong. He gently turned Bong's body towards him. Bong's face was covered in the blood that flowed from his neck. Blood was gushing from his mouth, as his entire body convulsed. Like a person on the verge of death, his eyes were losing focus and his body was slowly growing cold. No. Bong. Ugh. Bong wanted to speak with Chen Yuan, who was right in front of him, but with his neck being cut, he simply couldn't. Placing his hand on the bloody throat, Chen Yuan shouted, Don't speak. Haha. His mouth was moving, and Chen Yuan could understand what he wanted to say. Even though he was at death's door, he was still calling for his lord. He was Chen Yuan's first subordinate, and a man with whom Chen Yuan had shared his difficulties and hardships. There was no way he could let that man die so vainly. I can't let this happen. I am never going to let you die. Top. After pressing on the blood points to make sure that the bleeding stopped, he gathered internal energy onto his hand. His intention was to close the wound on Bong's throat by cauterizing it with heat. Hold on. Chikik. Kuawak. As he touched his throat, Bong released a stifled scream that was filled with pain. Although he had managed to heal the slashed skin, the dagger had gone too deep. Chen Yuan asked Nano. Nano. What is his condition? He was going to ask for Nano to scan, when someone appeared beside him. It was Ranong. As she approached them with intense energy radiating from her body, Chen Yuan warned her with a face filled with anger. Don't you dare come closer. He was so enraged that he looked like he would cut her down if she took another step closer. Realizing that she would be pushing her luck, she hurriedly dropped onto one knee and spoke. I know that you can't suddenly get yourself to believe me. However, since a member of the cult is in danger, can you please try to trust me? Chun Yuan was racking his brains as he looked at her. Even if Nano checked his condition right away, there was no guarantee that Hubong's urgent situation could be treated. Chun Yuan asked her, what do you plan on doing? I will need help from my lord. My help? We need to hurry, I'll explain later. Ranong moved closer and hugged Hubong, who was clearly dying. If Hubong was in his normal condition, he would have gotten flustered at the feeling of a woman's touch, but with him being almost dead, he showed no reaction at all. With his breath weakening, it seemed like he would stop breathing any moment. Fat. Holding Hubong, she headed towards the pond where a huge flame was burning. As she approached the boiling pond, the scorching heat could be seen visibly surrounding her. Hubong, who was on the verge of death, couldn't even feel the scorching heat. Duck. Ranong laid him down about 8 steps away from the pond. Please wait a moment. She immediately ran to the pond, and without any hesitation, dipped her hands into it to gather the hot water. Maybe thanks to her fire resistance, the water didn't burn her in the slightest. After gathering the water, she rushed over to where Hubong was. Chun Yuan, who curiously watched all that, asked, what is that? Diluted Qilan's blood. Qilan's blood? That is the blood of a Qilan? He thought that it was simply a pond of boiling water. However, the entire pond was full of blood of Qilan. How huge had the Qilan been that its blood could fill the entire pond? Transparent? Normally, blood would be red, but the steaming liquid in the pond was transparent. This Qilan blood is too dangerous to be touched. The first emperor of the empire used 10,000-year-old snow from the north to cool it down, and this is what it turned into. If the pond had Qilan's blood, which was diluted in 10,000-year-old snow, then what was the huge flame in the middle of the pond? He was in doubt, but the priority now was saving Hubong. What are you going to do with this? I noticed that Lord used extremely cold energy a while ago. I'd like you to use your cold energy on the Qilan's blood? This is what she'd meant by needing his help. It was to cool the diluted Qilan's blood. Even if the Qilan's blood is diluted, it's still very effective at regenerating physical damage. However, the heat is too strong even after so much dilution, it would be difficult for any man to withstand this. It was a side effect of the Qilan's blood. If a man with strong yang energy consumed it, he wouldn't be able to withstand the heat and would instead end up getting injured. As a result, only the court ladies had scales and flames. Chun Yuan, who realized this, asked her in an angry voice. Then, isn't it dangerous for him? It is, but only when taken in huge quantities, and if cooled, such a small amount can be safely consumed. Based on what she'd said, he realized that she hadn't tried it before. Although he didn't fully believe her, there was nothing else that Chun Yuan could do. The water had to be cooled as Shed requested. TSSSHHH. Chun Yuan extended his hand, whilst white frost slowly began forming on his hand. The cold energy was slowly spreading into the diluted Qilan's blood. As the steam rose, the blood gradually cooled little by little. Ah! It's cooling down. Ranong's eyes sparkled. She was worried about the consequences of the plan failing. Thankfully, the blood cooled successfully. The water that had been boiling until a moment ago had grown lukewarm. I'll put it in my mouth. Chun Yuan silently nodded, and she immediately put the Qilan's blood into her mouth. Huh? She then covered Hubong's lips with her own as she transferred the blood into his mouth and down his throat. With him being unconscious, Hubong couldn't swallow on his own, leaving her with no choice but to deliver the blood directly through mouth to mouth. What if he woke in the middle of the process? His first kiss had ended up being with a woman whose body and face were covered in red scales. Gulp! Gulp! The Qilan's blood rushed into Hubong's throat, and then gradually disappeared into his body. All they could do now was hope that the blood would have the desired regenerative effect. They didn't have to wait long to know if it had worked. Ah! Chun Yuan gasped. Hubong's pale face and his shallow breath had begun returning to normal. His body temperature began to rise as well. HAA, HAA, HAA. Even his breathing grew deeper and more stable. Looking down at his neck, the skin, which had been burnt by Chun Yuan's qi, gradually started changing little by little. The effects were happening a lot quicker than they'd expected. If this is how effective the diluted blood is, then how great would the real blood be? His gaze turned towards Ranong, who was covered in scales. At that moment, Yuan began wondering if she had consumed the real Qilan's blood. Ranong suddenly called for Chun Yuan's attention. Lord, please step away from him for a moment. The flames in his body will grow stronger now, I need to control it so that it doesn't fade away. The woman was well aware of the changes that the diluted Qilin's blood caused, and its effects, probably because she had witnessed it, when the court ladies had consumed it. That was clear when she asked Chun Yuan for help to cool down the blood. He himself confirmed that Bong was recovering, so he nodded his head and did as she requested. The doubt in his mind had slowly begun to subside. Tuck. Ranong then made Bong, who was recovering very quickly, sit cross-legged with his hands behind his back. That was when something passed through Chun Yuan's mind. The Qilin's blood can regenerate a damaged body? His eyes hastily turned towards the pond. The place he was looking at was the spot where the arms of Bloodmaster had been cut down, and her body had sunk into the pond. Am I just worrying without a reason? Chun Yuan's eyes narrowed. No matter how strong the regenerative effect was, would the Qilin's blood be able to bring someone back from the dead? He was in a lot of doubt, but decided not to waste his time thinking about it. At the bottom of the pond? The body of Bloodmaster, whose arms had been cut off, lifelessly sank to the bottom. With the water so hot, her skin should have been burnt, but her body was completely fine except for her face that was full of red blisters. Bubble. Bubble. In a lifeless corpse that showed no signs of movement, a strange and sudden change began to occur. The wounds from the air sword began healing at a rapid pace. Red scales then also began forming on and surrounding the wounds. Su. The change was happening very quickly. A short while, she slowly opened her eyes. She was in deep shock. Didn't I die? She had definitely suffered fatal injuries that she wouldn't be able to recover from, and had been pushed into the pond by the lord of the demonic cult. How was she alive? This is? She was curious about her current location. She was confident that she was in hot water, however she didn't seem to need to breathe in it. Unexpectedly, the hot water was actually very comfortable to her, and she couldn't feel any damage from the heat at all. Ah, I found it. This is Qilin's blood. Bloodmaster was absolutely convinced that she had found Qilin's blood. She had been blaming herself for dying so absurdly, but she was surprisingly still alive. She touched her face repetitively to make sure it was all real. My inner energy seems to have improved. It wasn't on a tremendous level, but it was higher and purer than before. Moreover, she also had fire like the woman Ranong, the guardian of the place. But the most insanely shocking thing was, my left arm? Her left arm, which had been severed, had unbelievably started to regenerate. Red scales had begun appearing all along her arm. She had by some miracle sunk to the same location as her arm, and the regeneration ability of the Qilin's blood had pulled it over and began restoring it. If I tried to approach the right arm, it might be possible to regenerate it as well. It was nothing but a hunch. As her left arm recovered, she swam to the surface in great anticipation. She wasn't sure how long she had been inside, but a long time must have passed for the blood to miraculously heal her fatal wounds. Chun Yuan, you thought that you killed me. But I survived. Huh. If I meet you again, I swear I'll make you pay. Phut. As she reached the top, a big surprise greeted her. Dumb. Ah. Bloodmaster's eyes widened seeing what was unfolding in front of her eyes. Her eyes lost focus as she looked at 12 air swords floating in the air, pointing towards her, ready to end her life at any time. This can't be. That was when someone's voice entered her ears. My intuition did not disappoint me, so you are still alive. There was no way her ears could ever forget that nightmarish voice. Chun Yuan. Her face distorted as she turned to look in the direction of the voice. I'll make sure you die for eternity this time. And the death penalty heartlessly fell. The 12 air swords slashed down at her all at once, as if they were waiting for that very moment. Slash. 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 Chapter 366. Be the Flame, Bong. Part 3. Impossible. She went pale as she realized that the regeneration process she'd just gone through had been useless. Chun Yuan. Shit. During the first battle, Bloodmaster hadn't been able to escape the attacks of 6 Force Chi air swords attacking her simultaneously. She'd struggled until her last breath, but had easily gotten her arms torn off. And now, in such a defenseless state, she had to face 12 of those overpowered weapons, not to mention that she was missing one arm. Puck. Ugh. Her entire body was slashed and stabbed in the most merciless way possible. Her injuries should be fatal as the number of swords had doubled. However, she frowned. Why doesn't it hurt? She was sure that her entire body had been stabbed by air swords, but strangely enough, she didn't feel any kind of pain. However, because of the attacks, her flesh had been mutilated and her body had been paralyzed. I need to re-enter the pond. Her instincts told her that heading back into the pond was the only way to survive. She struggled to move her numb legs, but in vain. Didn't you hear me? I said I'll make sure you die. Chun Yuan extended his left hand and moved his hands as if pulling on something. Her body that had been pierced by multiple air swords, got pulled away from the pond's outskirts. What the? She tried her best to resist, but it was a futile effort. Although her internal energy had risen thanks to the Qilin's blood, Yuan, who had reached the perfect Supreme Master level, was vastly stronger of her. Puck. She got pulled forward and was made to forcibly kneel in front of Chun Yuan. The expression of Bloodmaster, one of the Blade God's 6 martial clan leaders, was one of pure despair. Her eyes had fallen to the ground. What is this ugly energy? Even before she had fallen into the pond, she had felt that energy, but she hadn't considered seriously. However, now that she was so close to Chun Yuan, the energy she felt made her feel like she was walking down the path of death. The energy seemed like a black haze. Both Bloodmaster's instincts and the Qilin's blood had been warning her intensely. We can't deal with this. This is a superior predator. Run away. Fuck. A leader of the clan, knows that pretty well. Even if she wanted to run away, she wouldn't be able to move with all the swords piercing her body. Bloodmaster had thought that she had become invincible after consuming the Qilin's blood. How would she react if she knew what she'd consumed was actually the diluted Qilin's blood? Chun. Yeo, 1. She couldn't do anything but stare at him. His indifferent gaze told her that she was nothing more than an ant in his eyes, causing her to feel even more irritated. Seeing her enraged glare, Chun Yuan spoke in a calm and sarcastic voice. Let us behead you. Hearing his words, her eyes went wide. You bought our... Something sharp made contact with her neck before she could even swear at Chun Yuan. A sword made of black qi had slashed through her neck, cutting her down. A red line had slowly appeared on her neck and her eyes remained wide open. Before long, her head had fallen to the ground and rolled like a ball. Huh. When Chun Yuan waved his left hand, the 12-sword qi air swords immediately and mercilessly slashed her body into tiny bits. The swords didn't stop until her entire body had turned into nothing but minced meat. Since she'd been beheaded, it was practically impossible for her to survive, but Chun Yuan could still sense some energy coming from her, to be precise, from her head. Her head was still alive. What the? Crack. He stepped on her head and completely crushed her skull, finishing her for good. All her plans to seize the treasure of the imperial palace and to frame the demonic cult for it had failed miserably. At the same time, somewhere else, an enormous Yiksha statue had been built in Huangshan City, within Hangzhou, in the Zhejiang province. A man who was giving off an unusually eerie energy stood in front of the Yiksha statue, before turning around, and sitting. Behind him, an unidentified man, with a face covered in bandages, was holding a red box with its lid open. Keek. Keek. Inside the box, there was a fist-sized red worm making bizarre sounds. The man in bandages seemed uneasy about holding the box. Crack. After a long period of crying and trembling, the worm exploded. The man closed the lid of the wooden red box that held the remains of the dead worm. After carefully thinking, he opened his mouth. We failed. On the lid of the red wooden box, the word blood was written. This worm in the box had been connected to the worm that had been implanted into Bloodmaster's body. She was one of the 6 main seats and had been given the mission of entering the imperial palace. The man in bandages looked at the man in the shadows who was sitting cross-legged in front of the Yiksha statue. The tremendous and intimidating energy the seated man was emitting was the reason behind the other man's nervousness. After a long period of silence, the man sitting in front of the Yiksha statue silently touched the floor with his hand. Phut. Quack. The man who was holding the red box had been flung backwards like a sack of rice. After retreating 10 steps, he began vomiting mouthfuls of blood as if he'd been injured. Thud. The man in the bandages had continued vomiting blood, before dropping to his knees and then smacking his head into the ground. He'd done so because he knew well that that person hated hearing excuses. The man in front of the Yiksha statue finally opened his mouth. Du Yom, Du Quang, Du Munju, call all 3 of them here. It was a low, but terrifying voice. The man in bandages' eyes widened at his words. Those 3 were the martial masters of the clan. Huh? Are you talking about that Dumunju? Change in plans. Send them to Tongo to support the others. The man bandages was again shocked. There had never been more than 2 top-ranking members of the same family in the Blade God's 6 martial clan. However, in this case, half of the martial masters were from the same family. Phew. Tongo will be drenched in blood. The seated man had shown his willingness to achieve the great world he wanted to create. The Lord's command shall be obeyed. The underground hall, the last floor. Hubong's wounds had completely healed, and his life, which had been on the verge of fading away, had been saved. His face, which had grown pale, had regained its previous ruddy complexion. Someone had placed their hand on his back, providing him with support. Ranong. The expression on her face, as she closed her eyes, was odd. Those who normally took in the Qilin's blood were likely to have strong flame qi run rampant in their bodies. Even women with strong yin energy would end up losing their sense of pain as a side effect of the flame, and in some cases, the host would even die. If that was the case for women, then a man who was filled with yang energy shouldn't be able to handle it. For nearly 200 years, numerous men from the imperial palace had drunk the blood. The result had been nothing but death for them. Is it because cold qi was mixed in with blood? Fortunately, the Qilin's blood, whose flame had been neutralized by the cold energy, hadn't caused any problems. Maybe that was why the flame qi in Hubong's body hadn't gone berserk. That was her guess. This is weird. Why is it like this? No matter how well the Qilin's blood had been neutralized, there had to be certain changes. Nobody could hold on to their human form after drinking it. The proof was the red scales that were present on her body. The body creates the scales to generate the flames, so why hasn't his body undergone any changes? It was definitely odd. She checked his pressure points in hopes of finding an answer and finally subduing her curiosity. She wanted to make sure that the flame qi had been absorbed by Hubong's body. However, she found a foreign energy inside his core. It wasn't the normal internal energy, but a very violent energy that resembled Chen Yuan's. What is this black energy? It was an energy outside her field of understanding. The energy wasn't that strong or overpowered, but shockingly, it had totally absorbed the flame qi of the Qilin's blood. The black energy seemed to have suppressed the flame qi which came from the diluted Qilin's blood, like a hungry and superior predator. Have they consumed the blood of another spirit beast? As she'd guessed, Hubong had once drunk a black liquid. That black liquid had existed since the founding of the demonic cult. It was the blood of the black Amugi, Korean dragon. The blood of a spirit beast, a dragon, had been consumed in a small amount, and its energy had been silently sleeping inside Hubong. I guess nothing can be done. I need to let it go. She'd thought that she would need to help him by absorbing some of the flame qi, but it seemed there was no need. There was another energy present in Hubong's body preventing the invasion of anything else. However, something unexpected happened. I can't take my hands off. She had connected her flame qi to Hubong's internal energy core. However, she was now unable to break the connection. Ranong, who began feeling nervous, raised her energy and tried to cut off the connection. However, as she tried to do that, the ugly energy resting in Hubong's core began absorbing it as if it had been starving for a long time. My flame qi is running out. Ranong couldn't hide her embarrassment. At first, she'd noticed her energy being absorbed. She then tried to release even more energy in order to stop the connection, and now her flame qi was running out. This was something she had never experienced. In her attempt to solve the problem, she had eventually begun to emit flames from all over her body. She wanted Hubong's core to feel overwhelmed by her energy. But instead of feeling threatened or overwhelmed, something absurd happened. Flames. The flames had started to move from her body towards Hubong, and slowly covered his body. Flustered, she decided to resort to a rough method. Puck. Ranong placed her legs on Hubong's back, and pushed him with all her might to free her hands from his back. The two hands which had been attached to Hubong's back became unstuck. However, Hubong had already absorbed half of her flame qi. What am I supposed to do? She removed her hands before her flames spread all over his body, but by the time she pushed him away, he was already wrapped in flames. Despite the absence of red scales on his body, Hubong's body shockingly didn't burn, rather, it resonated with the flames. The flames had begun to burn away the clothes that Hubong was wearing. What on earth is this? She was slowly beginning to grow afraid as unexpected situations kept on unfolding. It looked like she would have to ask Chen Yuan for help to make sure that the flame chi spreading throughout Hu Bong didn't go berserk. She didn't know if Hu Bong would be able to handle such strong energy. Ranong turned her head and tried to call for Chen Yuan. Ugh. Lord. She couldn't find him in front of the pond. Her eyes shook as she looked around only to realize that Chen Yuan had disappeared. She saw a huge black energy resonating from the middle of the pond where the huge flames were supposed to be burning. Lolor. Instinctively, she had realized that it was none other than Chen Yuan. How? The Qilin's core had been placed in the middle of the pond, where huge flames kept on burning, and hadn't been extinguished for nearly 200 years. And now everything seemed to have suddenly disappeared. No way. In astonishment, she ran towards the middle of the pond where the flames had now ceased to exist.